Hello and welcome folks, my name is Fake Fairytale and you could say it's been a while. Don't worry though, I'm still here. I've just been busy in my private life and I've had a hard time figuring out what to make videos about. I've already discussed quite a few topics on my channel, but if you know something I'm missing, please feel free to share it in the comments. I also haven't forgotten about the Sporevent adventure that I'm working on. That's still happening. I actually made some progress behind the scenes and already created some structure for the storyline. I'll come back to it with a video in the future, though I do not know when exactly that'll be. In addition, as I mentioned in a previous video, I hit a mapmaking burnout last year, and truth be told, I'm still recovering. However, lately my interest for mapmaking has spiked and seems to be going uphill. I finished my Blacksmith battle map in December and currently am working on a Palisade Fort map. The waterfall you see in the background is actually a part of that. While working on this map, I glanced over to my Discord and I noticed a conversation going on about a topic that piqued my interest. It was about the question, when is a map finished? And that's a good question. I think it's very easy to linger on one map too long, simply because you want to make it look perfect and you're adding in all kinds of cool features only to realize you've overdone it in the end. And in fact, it's perfectly okay for a map not to do all the things at once. I actually think it's better to spread out your cool ideas over multiple maps. This topic, however, also reminded me of the mapmaking burnout and how working on a map too long can contribute to that. So I wanted to discuss these two things. How can you use a workflow to determine how far you are with your map and whether a map is finished? And what can you do to prevent, recognize, and recover from a mapmaking burnout? Let's dive right into the workflow and finishing a map first. Why do I mention a workflow? Well, it's a structure that helps you determine the scope of a map or project and makes it easier to identify a beginning and an end. It also helps you to measure progress, which can contribute to your motivation. Especially on a larger map or project, the whole process can be kind of daunting. The structure definitely doesn't have to be a written out plan or approach. I know mine isn't, but is mainly something I keep track of in my head while working. In my head, the steps go a bit like this. 1. There's plan inspiration phase, determining the main subject of the map and its purpose. 2 is the general layout and sketch phase. It's the basic design of the map and the subject of the map. 3 is expanding the key features, which are the biggest important other things in the map. 4 is the main body of work, which has basically two approaches, a section by section work style and an all-in-one style. 5, if you are taking the all-in-one approach, this is when you apply generic shadowing. 6, light and highlights. 7, light related shadowing. And then you're done. Well, there is one more phase that I want to talk about, and that's the frustration phase, but more on that later. Let's dive in a bit deeper. During the plan and inspiration phase, I decide what I want the map to be about. Depending on who you make maps for, this can be a variety of things. But for me, it's important to consider what I want to make and then consider what you guys and my patrons want to see. The map I'm working on in the background is an excellent example. I wanted to make something that could either serve as a base or could be assaulted or sieged. A fort, castle or encampment came to mind. I really wanted to try the new Forgotten Adventure Palisade assets that I had been eyeballing for a few months, so the Palisade was an easy choice. The subject will be a Palisade fort, and this means this fort has to be the focus of the map. I can add in bluff pieces to make it look pretty, but I don't want to add in an encampment next to it or place anything that will draw focus away from the fort. It also quite literally means that the fort will be at the center of your map. During the following step, general layout and sketch phase, I often already start working in Dungeondraft, and this is also often the moment I'll encounter my first issues. With the Palisade, I actually had a sketch, which is this one over here. Do you see those bent corners? Yeah, they're not gonna look pretty in Dungeondraft. You could make it work in Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint, but just not in here. So here I already make some alterations in the design to make it manageable. You don't want to spend 3 hours on a single corner to make it look good. So I made the fort with straight corners and continued on from here. I place down the important features, which are the palisade itself, the cliff and river, and when I'm reasonably happy, I continue. Don't be afraid to change your design. I find it very frustrating to spend 3 hours on a map and not make any visible progress. That might not be the case for you, but if you're like me, these things can bum you out of map making real fast. Keep things manageable. You can have 1 or 2 things that are hard to pull off, but if everything in your map is hard to pull off, chances are your map won't turn out as you intended. Also, don't try to use Dungeondraft outside of its limits, and unfortunately there are a few. This brings me to the next step, expanding key features. Here I add in other things that help flavor a map, but are not the defining topic, like the bridge on the top right or the woodworking section on the bottom left. I also defined a small cooking area in the fort. These give you an idea of the overall usage of space in your map. In a building, this step can be determining what each rooms will be exactly. If you decide to make an armor shop, for example, in step 2, you obviously picked a room for the shop itself. But are there other rooms in the building that haven't been assigned any purpose yet? That's what you can do right here. Step 1 is something that can take a few weeks or just come to you in an instant. And step 2 and 3 generally take no more than 1 hour. You could even do it in less than 30 minutes if you have an idea what you're looking for. This brings me to step 4, the main body of work. This is the longest phase during which you'll do most of the work. In my opinion, it has 2 approaches. Going through the map section by section, which means you'll pick a spot, like a room in a building, and do all the assets in there, including the basic shadowing, or an all-in-one approach, where you'll place any type of asset over the entire map. For example, all plants, or all furniture, or all light sources, and work your way through the map like that. I mix these up a little bit, but mainly I'm a fan of section by section. Why? Well, because it provides a continuous sense of satisfaction and a very clear visualization of what's been done yet and what still needs work. You can really see the map being finished step by step, as opposed to the whole map filling up slowly like in an all-in-one approach. I just think it's very rewarding to place down the last asset in a section and think, alright, that's done. What's next? The downside of this? Sometimes it's just hard to find something for a specific section of the map, like the last room in a building that needs to be filled, but everything essential is already in the building. What are you gonna do with that last room? I don't know. The all-in-one approach has its pros too. You finish the map by asset type, so you could check off plans after placing them all down, meaning you won't have to revisit and switch between assets as often. Also, when you zoom out after a session, you may find that you've filled up your entire map quite nicely. Lastly, I often get into a specific mindset that favors a specific section of the map, and these could be categorized as, for example, plans and outside or indoors and living rooms. If you're in the mood for doing a specific thing, or you're a bit in the zone, you might say, it might be easier to just finish up all the nice pieces of furniture in a map so that you are done with it and you can focus on something else. The downside here? Well, for me it is that I often forget to shadow all the things I did earlier. Also, the sense of reward and satisfaction is less apparent to me, but your mileage may vary. Let's be clear though, there isn't one best option. It's just what works for you. That satisfaction I get from finishing a map section by section or looking at an already finished section of the map is also something I use to get through my frustration phase. In literally every map I've made up to this point comes a moment that I absolutely despise my map. And don't get me wrong, I'm generally a very positive guy. But even in the first maps I've ever made, I encountered this sense of frustration. My question to you here is, do you recognize this? It usually occurs somewhere along step 3, when you're expanding the key features, or during the initial stages of step 4. It's not always on the exact same moment, but it's always there. I get the urge to scratch the map entirely and start with something new. And this is something that got amplified during my mapmaking burnout, but more on that in a minute. I also know that the solution is to simply push on through and keep working on the project a bit longer. Because 95% of the time, about an hour of work later, I love the map. And then I mean I really love it. I get super motivated and enthusiastic, and the whole process is smooth sailing from here. Has anyone ever experienced this? You can share it with me in the comments if you like, or DM me on Reddit or Discord if you're not comfortable with doing so. Let's continue. Step 5 is generic shadowing. If you take the all-in-one approach, this is where you apply the basic shading. I won't elaborate on what it is exactly, but if you'd like to know more, I'd recommend you check out the video in the top right corner right now. I go into a lot of detail on how to highlight and shadow things on your map, so that might be of interest to you. The next step is lights and highlights, and this is what I would say is more or less the finishing few things of a map. Here I start placing down the lights and add in some highlights, and at this stage I don't want to add in any more assets. It's sort of an unwritten rule I made for myself. I make some minor alterations if need be, but the map should be finished in terms of assets. I decide whether or not to proceed to the stage by zooming out regularly during step 4 and 5 and get an overview of the map. If I have to think longer than a few seconds on what I could add, or my eye isn't drawn to a specific spot that is obviously missing something, it usually means that the map has filled up quite nicely and it's not worth adding anything extra anyway. It is also just very tedious to add things when lighting, highlights and light related shadows have already been placed. It just messes up the work you've been doing to make everything look realistic. The last step is step 7, light related shadowing. Again, I'd like to refer you to the video above for more details. It's just adding in shadows that are cast from recently added light sources. I think it's important to note, and to mention this again, that you shouldn't try to do everything in one map. Don't be afraid to call it quits when you've done the things you came to do. Working too long on a project, racking my brain to find something else that I can add, really bumps me out eventually. Which brings me to the next section, mapmaking burnouts. And if this doesn't interest you, feel free to skip to the end. I still want to pitch a cool idea you might like. I don't think I have to explain the concept of a burnout this day and age. Unfortunately, many people experience them. Though in this case, I'm talking about a mapmaking burnout. It's kinda similar to the DM burnout. I can imagine that if you're just doing this as a hobby without a Patreon page or any obligations, you might not recognize yourself in this. Or maybe you do, because you're forcing yourself to finish up a map for your game night. Having mapmaking become a chore because you have to is, in my experience, the issue. It's the main cause of this type of burnout. It kills your creativity and it means you'd rather be doing something else. I think it's important to recognize this feeling for what it is and what it might lead to, and having experienced this myself, I really wanted to give my view on what to do when you're feeling this gnawing feeling creep up. The answer though is quite straightforward. Take a break. Mapmaking is a creative process, and although some people perform better under pressure, plenty of us humans don't. I've found that nothing kills creativity like the idea of having to do something. It's also the reason why I've allowed myself to work on maps or videos when I feel like it rather than on a set day and time. This is easier if mapmaking is not your livelihood, though I believe for most people this won't be the case. Whether you're in a mapmaking burnout or noticing you're starting to lose the pleasure of working on a map, taking a break is a good solution to the issue, though also finding out what gives you the idea that you have to and try removing that from the equation will definitely help you in the future. So that's enough about that. Now on to my secret plan. As of right now, I've set up a Reddit community with the purpose of helping people out who are struggling with a map they're currently working on or have worked on in the past. I've had quite a bunch of questions on my videos and Reddit posts about how do I do A or how can I make B. And I think I might be able to help some people by going over the things that they're struggling with and try and give some practical advice. I'll then record that advice and put it on YouTube for everyone to benefit from it. The aim of this Reddit is to help those who haven't found the right help in another subreddit, or have more complex issues that require a video to be explained, or, God forbid, for those people who want my specific opinion on something. Can you imagine that? I also see it as a potential source of video topics to help me keep the YouTube channel growing. Regardless of the amount of maps posted, which can be either 0 or anything above that, I have no clue, I'll leave the Reddit page online for the coming months. So even if you watch this video in the future, you can still drop in your map there if you like. I'll link to the page in the doobly-doo. I also realized that there are plenty of other spaces where people can actually ask for feedback, though I also remember seeing people that get ignored in subreddits or don't get the answer they were looking for. So I hope to help these people that are in our community, and I also want to help grow a community, of course. That's it for now, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I know this might be a bit more on the philosophical sides, but nevertheless, I hope it's useful for your mapmaking endeavors. And also don't worry, I will be uploading some more practical videos on shadowing staircases, for example, in the near future. If you did enjoy the video, please hit the like, favorite and subscribe button, and don't forget to ring the sub notification bell to stay informed every time a new video goes live. And I hope to see you again in the next video.